it's my year, yeah. I really feel it's my time, think it's my, yeah.
Well, Paul, thank you for joining us on A Cup of bELieve podcast. You know, it's always great to talk to you, and obviously your mindset has always been inspiring to me and the way that you go about your life and your business in general. But, you know, we met a few years back now when you invited me on your podcast, and honestly, I had a great time with you, great conversation, and you do such a great job with it. Can you tell me how you got into the podcast world as well?
Well, I really enjoyed our conversation, first of all, and I'm humbled to be on your podcast. Jumped at the opportunity. It's a matter of our schedules aligning, because I think we're both similar in the way that we try to chase a lot down on a day-to-day basis, and that's what I did with the podcast. Really, I would consider myself a very curious and inquisitive human being, and that works really well with this form, right? Where you can sit down and listen to someone talk about experiences or skills that they've acquired over time and really get deep into the weeds. And I think that's where a lot of the growth lies versus our human tendency right now to consume social media content, which could be in 2 to 5 second bits. Are you deeply learning? So I had been listening to podcasts for 15 years or so, largely because I grew up with what's called auditory processing disorder, and I just struggled with reading. So I had this program called Kurzweil 3000 when I was in college, which basically you scan your reading materials and it reads it back to you, and you can highlight and sort of talk to it. And it's the same technology that Apple and Siri uses today. And so podcasting not only was organic, but also really helpful for me. And I think, like you, we like to converse. So it occurred to me probably 6-7 years ago that it was my chief of staff at the time that was like, "Hey, all these conversations that you have, like with people like Eric LeGrand, like, would you ever be interested in recording that so that people can hear it?" And that's how it started, and then it became a lot of fun. But it's a lot to do, as I'm sure you're finding out now.
It is, but I would, like you said, having a conversation, you learn more about people, their lives, and you know where they come from, and just how they do what they do on a daily basis. It's very, entertaining, and I love to learn, like you said, about people. I had no idea. I'm a very visual learner, because a lot of times people will tell me an idea and they'll say this and that. I'm like, I need to see it. Like, can you draw it up for me? Can I look at it on paper? Like, that's just how I understand stuff, and that's how my brain processes things. So it's funny that you said that as well. Like, your audio, like you want to hear things, how it works. But I want to jump right into this, Paul, because a lot of times, when we're getting into lacrosse, and I love how it's growing in this country and just around the world, honestly, because I remember watching how this goes all the way back to the Native American days when they were playing lacrosse. But you have been highly considered as the LeBron James of lacrosse. Please tell me how that name came about and how that really got you into that mind, because we all know LeBron James and how his greatness has just been going on for year upon year. So talk to me about that name and how you try to live up to that.
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, you take it humbly and respectfully, and would never have expected when this New York Times writer put that in ink. I think it was in 2010 or 2011. There's this article that came out about what I was doing in lacrosse and how I was playing on the field. And ahead of that, like the headline of that New York Times article was, "Can this man make lacrosse sexy?" It's like, and then it qualified me as the LeBron James of lacrosse. And I remember thinking, damn, that's a lot to live up to. But, and then I've dissected it different ways. You know what? It's like nicknames, right? You never come up with your own nickname, you never sort of try to develop your own stuff. That feels contrived. So if that's how that writer felt, what I never had expected was 10 years later, I'd be working on a film with LeBron about the story of lacrosse. And, you were at our premiere at Tribeca. But, I think as athletes, and this, you just grind, man. I mean, you set big goals, like wanting to be the LeBron James of your sport, or the Michael Jordan, or the Tom Brady, or the Abby Wambach, and that's fine, and you should. But then day to day, it's hyper present. I love that about sports, is every rep you focus on in the gym, every practice you're looking at picking up a ground ball successfully so that you can get into a dodge, so that if the dodge is successful, you can take a shot, so that when you take the shot, it either hits the net or misses, or the goalie saves it. And what's your react? So present. And then when you get out of it, you tend to enjoy sort of the exterior stuff. But no successful athlete I have ever met lives in sort of the future projections, and those that do don't make it. So I loved it. I appreciated it. I enjoyed it, but then I went back to work. I would loved and appreciated, different comparisons as well. But that's also just part of the entertainment value of sport.
It's crazy because I believe my injury would happen 3 days after that article was published, and then my article was published in the New York Times for different reasons. 4 days after that, but it's crazy just that time period. Obviously, my injury, but then that article that came out about lacrosse, and I wanted to ask you now, being this lacrosse superstar, have you ever heard somebody say, "Wow, you're the Paul Rabil of lacrosse," or just everyone just started chattering?
I don't know. I don't know, man. I think maybe one day, but that would be I think we hope to leave some type of imprint on the future generation of players. What I do know is that it's really fun going to ESPYs or going to other sort of cross discipline events. Super Bowl, you have a lot of NBA players and NFL players and baseball players, NHLers that are there. And what I've really enjoyed over time, and it's mostly because of my age, I'm 37 now, and pro sports is a young man's game, as you know. It's most of the average age in any pro sports league is 24. But I've really enjoyed meeting stars in their respective leagues that grew up playing lacrosse, and at some point, like, hey man, I watched your YouTube channel. Hey man, I used to have your poster on my wall, and I've gotten that and floored because I'm watching these guys on SportsCenter being covered every day. So that's the beauty, though. We all played multiple sports growing up. I hope that younger kids and families and parents are listening to this now. Sports specialization that has taken over. I mean, I played basketball, soccer, I swam, track and field, played backyard baseball, backyard football, street hockey, anything I could get my hands on. And so naturally, if you see a lot of athletes at the top, they all play different sports, and a lot of them played lacrosse.
And I always say my biggest regret in high school was I stopped playing baseball and basketball because I put all my focus towards football. I was awarded a scholarship to go to Rutgers as a freshman, and I literally said, you know what, I'm stopping baseball and basketball. And I look back on it, I'm like, damn, I kind of wish I did play those, my 4 years out of those other sports because, like you said, it's just that those memories and being able to, take different challenges that way.
Yeah, but you got it right though, because the thing was is you had reached a level of expertise in high school to have gotten recognized by a college to get recruited. And if we think about the race through sports specialization is all about getting recruited. And the lesson for you, E, was the same for me because I stopped playing other sports after my sophomore year, was two things. Like when you know, and you need the parents' oversight to educate a 16-year-old because a 16-year-old will never fully know. You know what I'm saying? And so that's number one. And number two is, how do you know? Well, there's going to be outside influences. Say, I'm ready to recruit Eric LeGrand. I'm ready to recruit Paul Rabil. Here's a scholarship to show evidence to that. And until you really get that, keep playing multiple sports. And that usually doesn't come around till freshman, sophomore year, maybe junior year in high school.
Yeah, Mama Dukes was like, they're offering you a scholarship. That is your route, and that is what you focus on. Because
we're not playing anything else.
Exactly.
Yeah, we're shutting it down now.
Exactly. And I want to get into a little bit some of the intricacies of lacrosse. And obviously, I know you can shoot a ball 111 miles per hour, and the physicalities that you bring to the game. Can you talk a little bit about some of the lacrosse training and how it maybe can, I guess, replicate into some of the other, like football, baseball, basketball? Obviously, we all have different training methods, but talk a little bit about some of that lacrosse training and be able to get to that top peak of an athlete that you have been.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible sport. As you had mentioned, it's a Native American game. It comes from the Haudenosaunee people. Before French colonists came over hundreds of years ago and saw this game and loved it and called it lacrosse, it was called Dehontik Wahis, which means they bump hips. And natives have played it for over 1,000 years in North America, and it's known as a warrior's game. It's a tough game. There was a 1956, and maybe into the 60s Sports Illustrated cover that had a Johns Hopkins player on it, and it said "The Tough Game." And I think lacrosse captures so many different disciplines of sports that I loved. So it captured the skill and discipline and agility of basketball, the contact of football, the hand-eye coordination of baseball and hockey and golf, and it was really an amalgamation of all those things. I love that about lacrosse, and that's what gravitated me toward it. And at a time where I was playing basketball and soccer more.
Interesting, because I played lacrosse a few times in the streets, and it was just a skill set that I never really acquired as a young age. But like you said, the hand-eye coordination, being able to grab the ball, then the physicality of bumping somebody, and then obviously I didn't know all the rules. So of course, being a football player, I used to just try to take people out because I didn't know what I was doing out there. But I used to have fun with it, playing in the streets. And is that something? Would you say you picked it up just in rec leagues, or like how did it come about?
100%. 100%. And this is the challenge of lacrosse. It's no different than the challenge of hockey and golf, is that there's been this sports specialization curve. It's like club games going on. So not everyone can afford club lacrosse. We couldn't growing up. I played rec sports. And so I tried it because my neighbor was playing and he gave me his backup stick. And like one of the reasons why kids pick up sports is to have fun and connect with their friends. And then we start developing competitive flair. And that didn't happen for me until probably 7th or 8th grade. But I was playing it because I was hanging out with my friends and I had more competitive juice in hoops. I was a hooper. My dad grew up in Winston-Salem, and that was the stuff that I liked. But as I luckily played the game more and became more skilled at it, I started to understand it more. And there's 3 reasons why kids stop playing a sport. It's either they're outskilled, they're outsized, or they're not having fun. Outsized is a big one because when we're younger, you and I grow at all different rates. And if you just slot kids in based on their age, you're going to get knocked over. Skill, like lacrosse, like hockey, golf, baseball, hand-eye, it's like different than just going out and hitting someone, And then fun is the big piece. If you don't figure out the skill, if you're too small, you ain't having fun, you're going to quit. And so we try to think about now at the league level, how do we keep more kids in the game? How do we get more kids in the game? How do we keep them in the game? And there's transferable skills, right? Like my brother played football. I loved playing football, and like the idea of just going out and hitting, it translates over. A lot of the top defenders in the world in lacrosse have a pedigree in football. We're all state. We're up for player of the year in their respective region in high school football. And that's an amazing thing that I think about quite a bit.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about you off the field now, and people know you for a little bit of your swagger. You come styling out with the fresh suits, and I've been told that everyone looks for you with the beard and the chest hair. Come on now, tell me where all that swagger comes from, my brother.
My Lebanese roots. First of all, my dad's 100% Lebanese. We're second generation, so that's where I get all the chest hair from. I'd say that, and probably ate a lot of kale growing up and tofu, and now drink a lot of whiskey. So I would say those 3 things, and then suits, and I think fashion is an interesting thing as we've seen it cross over to sports more and more over the last decade. Is that for a long time athletes viewed our fashion as fixed. It's just the uniform. And then we had our practice uniform. And then we were off the field, we just wanted to relax. We're getting sweats, you know what I'm saying? And now I think, especially for someone like myself who retired, I don't have that game day uniform. So what's my uniform now? What am I representing on a day-to-day basis? And so I like to put a lot of thought and sort of, go through different ideas of what I think, that look good, feel good, play good mentality we all grew up thinking about.
Well, now I know that you're a whiskey guy. I don't know if you know, but I got my own whiskey company now, Eric LeGrand Whiskey. So I will be sending you a bottle of that bourbon, my brother, because you need to get
I can't wait to try it. I can't wait to try it.
I'll take care of you in the morning with the coffee, and I'll take care of you in the evening with the whiskey.
There you go, man. I got you all day, and I got your podcast during the day.
I love it, my man. I love it. So I know that we're going to get into a fate of a sport in a little bit with LeBron James and Uninterrupted and how that came about, but I saw the interview with you on The Shop. Tell me what that experience was like with LeBron James and wrapping up with all those guys, Maverick Carter. I love to be able to see how how diverse that you have been with all your interviews and things of that nature. What was that experience like for you?
Great people. I think we had Drew Barrymore, Idris Elba, and Kyrie Irving also as guests, and So it was an eclectic group of people who are in, different fields, right? Drew had legendary acting career. Now she's a television host. Idris is, an incredible actor, and Kyrie is, I think, one of the most dynamic basketball players of the last decade, and certainly a talked about person. And has different views and all that type of stuff that he's not scared of articulating. Um, so it was, and where did I fit in that, right? So I was having done a lot of work with Uninterrupted. You mentioned our film, but really trying to drive sort of reconciliation around lacrosse in the culture, right? And the way people view it, because I think lacrosse is not only a beautiful game and fun and talked about all the athletic skills and characteristics go into it, but what's its image right now, right? And I think over the last couple of decades, its image was expensive and elite and exclusive and Northeast and white and preparatory and things like that. And, I think about this every day because that's not how the game was created, and the game is for everyone. And so, how do you not only tactically, when we talk about youth lacrosse and different initiatives that we're working on, tactically confront that, but also how do you verbally discuss it? And when I was on there, we talked a lot about its native roots. We talked about, sort of owning its reputation of what it is and what we're doing differently about what it can be and what it should be, and recognizing its heritage and paying it forward. So those are conversations that I look forward to having. They're hard, but you spend a lot of time therapeutically understanding how to communicate with others and how to be open and honest and all that type of stuff.
And when you hear somebody that really doesn't understand lacrosse or doesn't know much about it, but what you have done building your own professional league, how do you respond to those people that may not be able to put that into into their own mind of what you were able to accomplish, obviously on the field, but now off the field and all the stuff that went into that, like that, like I said, we're gonna dive into
Yeah.
the documentary, but how do you explain what you have accomplished with the sport of lacrosse?
Well, it's a constant pursuit, right? Getting the league off the ground was probably the biggest, um, probably like the biggest challenge I've had in my life. Certainly as in my career, because I was playing and starting something new in the face of an establishment, had loads of support, but it was really difficult. And now it's just as difficult, just in different ways, right? You learn about human experiences and empathy are all on a relative scale, but if we can access certain experiences that we've had to empathize with others, to understand this phase of difficulty in building the business now 5 years in versus what it was 6 years ago before we had even made an announcement. um, it's really hard, but in the end, it's not too dissimilar than what we started this conversation with, which is,
Mm-hmm.
as an athlete, you can aspire to be the LeBron James of lacrosse, and
Mm-hmm.
that's important. And now you got to take out, your working boots and your gloves, put on your hard hat, and go to work every single day, and sort of package that idea up and put it on the shelf, and then revisit it later. And that was the idea with the PLL. Is like, ooh, how could you ever think about creating something now with 8 teams and a major media relationship with ESPN and 14 game weekends? And it's like, we're growing to become the next MLS. How can you do that? Well, you have to put that aside, and you have to focus on the task at hand, which back in those days it was having conversations with players and getting them familiar with what we were building and the idea, and getting them then contracts and coming up with team names, and talking to officials and hiring chief operating officers down to marketing coordinators to legal. And it was just laying one brick at a time, truly. And when I look back at it, I go, wow, that was a pretty amazing experience that we were able to go through. And I probably would never do it again.
Yeah, yeah, I would never do it again. But there's a quote that really stuck out to me there. I'm sorry if I mispronounce one, a word here or there, but I remember you said for 14 years, it was hard to explain to people that you were happy doing something when you weren't happy. You were actually embarrassed. Please elaborate more on that.
Yeah, and that comes through, again, spending a lot of time in therapy and understanding how to access vulnerability for things that we feel ashamed of or embarrassed of, and be able to communicate that. And what I was worried about when I made that comment on the doc, after I made that comment, I remember talking to the executive producing team and being like, oh gosh, the last thing I want is some 11-year-old somewhere in the country that looks up to me to say like, oh, that's weird. I looked up to him and he's ashamed to be a lacrosse player. And the distinction was, no, I actually love this game. I'm so passionate about it that I'm giving up my role as a player right now to build the future of pro lacrosse. But I was embarrassed around what it meant to be a pro lacrosse player. That needed change. And the side by side E was my wages compared to my peers in the NBA and the NFL, and the resourcing, the reputation, the stadiums that we were playing at, the fans that were not in the stands, things like that. It was just constant. And when you care so much about what it is that you do, and those people who are over top of you don't, there's friction, right? And I had felt that friction for 10 years, and behind the scenes had sort of been learning and finding out my purpose in lacrosse over time was to actually do something about it.
Well, I thought it was so cool in that documentary of how much actual footage that you have had over and recorded
Yeah.
over the years. Like I had no idea how much recorded, footage that you had from years ago before you even knew that you would be able to create this documentary and collaborate obviously with ESPN and whatnot. Where did that idea come from, I guess, about recording all of this that was going on behind the scenes?
Yeah, well, there was some stuff that when I had mentioned, call it NFL or NHL players growing up right now, they said, oh, I watched your YouTube channel. There was some stuff that we just logged from my YouTube channel that had been around for 15 years that never published, but you just kept cameras going. And then the other part was when we were actually building the PLL, I had that idea that was like, I think this can be a documentary, primarily because you go back to podcasts, right? You hear origin stories of entrepreneurs, of athletes, of league executives, and they tell these amazing stories that you and I love listening to and sharing. And if only I could have seen, Dana White and the Fertitta brothers 25 years ago in Vegas, looking at the UFC and deciding to buy it for $2 million. If I could have seen that, that would have been so cool. So I remember thinking, man, what we're taking on is so mission based. Let's record some of it. And guess what? If it doesn't work, that might actually be a better documentary. So let's just keep recording. And that was sort of my idea.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's insane to just even think about. But like I said, I just love all that behind the scenes stuff because it just helps build the story and narrate it. And I want to dive into some of these cold cut calls that you were calling these players and trying to convince them to come to the professional lacrosse league when you're building this. Because yes, you can say I have, I was able to build this, but no one really knows the background and how to convince players and what type of mindset that you have to be in and being able to accept failure and then also being able to enjoy the success that you have going through that. So somebody was like calling all the lacrosse players and trying to convince them to come to the PLL.
Well, the first part to acknowledge is that we were offering better wages. We were offering all of our players equity and health care. The latter two, they never had access to. And then the wages, we were offering them 4 times what they were currently getting. So you would think like, okay, this is going to be pretty straightforward. And frankly, that's why they take the calls. And then you have 10 years of relationships built on different teams with Team USA and even the Team Canada guys that I knew. So different than say like 2 private equity suits coming in that had never, met any players in pro lacrosse. They get a phone call. It's just not the same. So it's one of your own. It's a different type of charge, right? So that was phase 1, was always pretty easy and straightforward. And wow, you guys can do that. Where are you coming up with the money, right? Phase 2, which was more surprising and not expected, was right toward the end, right? Because MLL, our competitor, was still operating at the time. You learn that even in a bad relationship, it's difficult to leave. We can think about our romantic relationships in the past. We can think about friendships that we've had that are toxic. It's just the idea that the devil known is better than the devil unknown, right? Is why people stay in toxic relationships. And the other thing about the devil unknown is it could be something great. But that's the way our minds work, because in our most primitive state, in our modes of survival, all of our ancestors, they woke up every day trying to find food and not be hunted. And so that's why our neuroscience is always wired at fight or flight, like something bad's going to happen. And that's okay. It's just sort of understanding the principles of what our reactions are. So actually phase 2 was more difficult and unexpected, and a reminder of the psychology of the human race is like, oh yeah, they are going to get cold feet toward the end, and have some patience with them. And that was some stuff that we went up against. It didn't come out in the film, but that was unique. And then once you get them in, and we had that first game weekend, it was like, oh, all in from here.
Well, yeah, obviously you dive into the psychological side of things a lot. I love that because it just gives you an explanation and understanding of where your mindset is and the reason why you think and the way you're doing the process, the way you process your thoughts into action. Now you get an opportunity now, but while you're playing in the same league, but also recruiting players into your league to have a right where they're going to buy you out. I'll never forget you and your brother counting the numbers and figuring out like we can if we accept this offer, we can make a lot of money here. How do you go from okay now we can make this money to what? Go back to our thoughts and principles of why we're doing this now and not accept that type of offer.
Yeah, present moment and principles, as you had mentioned. So I always stay so focused on the present, right? That's why I've had the career that I had on the field and what we've been able to do in the PLL. And so that present moment is also a reminder of what we want to do, our principles, our goals. And yes, that was a lot of cash that they offered us. But to me, it was so easy to say no to because it was one pretty close to the year prior where they were bashing our names and trying to take us down. And an athlete, you sort of grow up in the system, remembering the loss from a year ago, remembering the way those guys treated you 5 years ago. You have long memory when it comes to rivals and competitors and stuff. So to me, I was like, nope, not even thinking about it. Mike obviously brought the reality to the table. So how much we could take, and it was more money than ever either of us had ever been offered or even considered. But again, going back to the principal nature of what we wanted to do, which was bigger than not just offering a better environment for pro players now, but it's changing the trajectory of lacrosse and reconciling with its past for the future. So that was ultimately why it was a split decision. Honestly, a split second decision. We didn't talk about it much after that day.
Well, you had it all on film and to watch Mike's reaction when you guys counted the money, just walk away like thinking about all that money that's on the table, but obviously staying towards your principles and things.
Well, the filmmaker's point of view there is like at that point, because that was championship weekend of year one, so we had. So when you asked about the film that we recorded before, that was before we brought on a director or any producers or production partners like Spring Hill. It was just myself with our director of photography, guy who had worked on my YouTube channel, saying, all right, let's also shoot for this documentary that we may or may not do. And then once we announced on TV, then we had a director come to us, Michael Doniger. Then we had filmmakers come to us and say, we want to produce this. So at that stage, when we got the offer, we started learning how to how to shoot timely. So when my first instinct, when I get this text from Andy Murstein, instead of opening it, I tell our camera operators, I message director, I got a note from Andy Murstein. He goes, don't open it until we're ready. So we have all this anticipation coming, and then the cameras catch up to us. And they're like, okay, cool, you can open it. So I pulled Mike into that back room, and that's when we both read it live. So there's always a little bit of, because you wonder, I love documentaries. You wonder, like, they just have cameras on them all the time. How does this happen? Right? And so there's an understanding of your director telling you, like, don't open that. Because he knows I'm not an actor, so I wouldn't be, and Mike ain't, so we ain't going to be able to, redo that scene.
That's actually awesome. Like to bring the whole backstory. Now you get the text and now you're anticipating, you want to read it, but
I got to read this. I got to wait for the camera
guy over here.
Yeah.
But please, go into a little bit details about the ESPN deal and being able to take this game to the next level and just the behind-the-scenes work that it took to get that deal done, because we're talking about the worldwide leader in sports and getting them to just say, we have potential with this here. Obviously, like we talk about the grind and all the work that's put in, but this isn't now being physical on the field. This isn't the work grind that you deal with, in the weight room sessions and those practice sessions. This is something where you really have to have a lot of thought and mindset of growing a business and convincing them that, this is the product that we have. The world needs to see it.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Yeah. Well, we had to build reputation, we had to build credibility, and we had to build viewership numbers. And our first media deal we struck was actually with NBC and Peacock because ESPN, needed to see it. And we had guys at NBC that took a bet on us, and we're so grateful for that relationship. And we were able to prove for the first time in pro lacrosse history that people would watch. And it was a grind, but you learn the media business. I knew nothing about broadcast cable outside of what I would read on Variety or, Sports Business Journal, but actually getting into the weeds of programming and timing and advertising, whether it's in game or spots and dots, like all that stuff is a lesson, on the ground. And we grew year over year, and we then learned what it was to properly pitch a network like ESPN that, is the worldwide leader for a reason, because they have not only 24-hour programming to support their live sports, but they also have an incredible social presence, which gives you unlimited inventory if you think about promotional and marketing access, because we can put out a tweet every other second if we want. And that's different than, more of the rigid television, daytime programming. So there were all of those reasons to join ESPN, and we built relationships with Jimmy Pitaro, who's the chairman of ESPN, to Burke Magnus, who's the president, Dan Margulis. Like, they've just got a great team over there, and that's really important too. And as entrepreneurs, which we still are, co-founders, and that's rare in sports, because you usually have seasoned executives come in at some point in any startup phase. We're entrepreneurs because we're lucky enough to get to choose people who we enjoy working with, and that's a big piece.
That's a huge piece, and I'm glad that you actually brought that up, because I wanted to ask you what it's like working with your brother. Obviously, when it comes to business, a lot of times people say business is business. Well, now doing it with family members and knowing your brother for as long as your entire life, and now having to go into the business role with him. How do you guys have conversation? Do you guys set boundaries? Do you guys get
Yeah,
over those boundaries? When you grow up wrestling with your brother, knocking each other around, like, do you still at an adult age when he tells you no or you say this? Do you kind of have that bark back at him because that's your brother, or do you guys have
totally.
those boundaries?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why people say don't mix family and business,
Hmm.
is that, and the same reason why when we all go home for the holidays, the same fights take place and all that type of stuff, right? It's family patterns. It's best example I was ever told was actually from my former sports psychologist, John Elliott. And he was like, you take a sheet of paper, an 8 by 11, and you fold it for the first time right in the middle. You fold it in half. All right, and you take it apart. How difficult it is, if ever, can you create standalone new creases in that paper? The original one is always there. And that's how I think about our reactivity in our familial relationships, and why when we go home as mature adults that have done so much work on ourselves and so on and so forth, we fall into the same patterns. It's so much easier for that crease of paper just to go back into its half fold than a quarter fold or a third fold. And it can be done, but it takes a lot of work. It's a lot of repetition, and it's never just one time and done. And so that makes sense probably to anyone who's listening with a family member or something like that they've worked with. However, what I would say the benefit is, which is comes in spades, is when you're taking on something complicated like building a pro sports league, where there's so many different businesses underneath that. You need to have a co-founder that can give you the love and support that is unrelenting, that is permanent, that you get in a family member. And I think that for both Mike and myself was superseding of any other sort of short-term conflict. And as we work to grow our relationship through this business, we start learning more about each other and our hot buttons and ways that we can support. And one of the things that we often say, and we share this with the company too, because as the business grows and we all experience things, like we're usually operating most times from the best intentions. And everyone's best intentions at the PLL is to move it forward, to make it into a big success. So if you're differing with someone within your business unit, or if I'm differing with Mike, sometimes it's helpful just to step back and say, hey, we both want the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. And so where are you coming from? Here's where I'm coming from. And that usually diffuses any type of steam of you're not seeing me, I'm not seeing you. It's like we actually want the same thing. Let's see that together.
Yeah, and I believe Mama Dukes, man, she helps me out on a lot of stuff when it comes to behind the scenes work with my businesses. And, we butt heads too. We go at it all the time. At the end of the day, I realize, like, that's my mom right there. So, I got to
Yeah,
watch what I say and how I react. So, as you
totally.
said, because you want to keep that same respect, but also, sometimes when things aren't going right, you get a little fiery. And so I understand
Yeah.
that relationship and I respect it.
Yeah.
One of the another things I really respect about you is you had a long, professional lacrosse league career, but you showed the very end of your career in the documentary Fate of Sports. What was that like for you now to show the ending of your career and the injuries and battling back compared to when you're at your peak and you're dominating, everyone's seeing that. But now with the
Yeah.
Fate of Sports, if someone never watched lacrosse before, you're seeing you at the end of your career and the battles that you went through
Yeah.
and trying to overcome injuries. And can you talk a little bit about some of that and being able to battle back from those injuries?
Yeah. I think it was different, but it was also really important story to tell is when we're at our end, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think Dylan Thomas's poem, "Do Not Go Gentle into That Good Night," is how every athlete feels toward the end of his career, and being honest with that and showing that is, I think, more powerful than the same old documentary of an athlete at his peak. Would I have loved to have had that? Sure, of course, but that's going to be for the next version or versions of myself in professional lacrosse, um, because that's what we're doing to take the PLL to the top, is creating more global recognition and national fandom, such that when our current MVP Trevor Baptiste uh, has enough fandom and interest for there to be a documentary on his moment right now, we'll get that. And that's satisfying for me to know that there will be players downstream in the next 1, 3, 5, certainly 10 years that grew way more awareness and attention than I was ever able to touch.
And the big thing, as we know, in the world that took place in 2020, just how crazy things were and the ups and downs and
Yeah.
people at each other's throats. But you made sure that it was right in the forefront that you would take a stand for social justice and being able to empower many more different races into the professional lacrosse league and being able to grow that sport. What made you go into that? And it just shows your character, obviously, as a person, but a lot of at a time where people could have just said, I'm not going to touch this at all. I'm just going to stay focused on what we're doing, building this business. How come that was important to you?
Well, is the core principle of our mission, which was not only trailblazing the future of professional lacrosse, but also honoring the heritage of the game.
Mm-hmm.
And the heritage of the game is indigenous. And so if we take all of our personal views and our personal experiences, which are all very different, there's one thing to share that and to advocate, and in some cases, get out there and protest, march, donate, read, educate, share. All that stuff is important for individuals. Where the crossroads was, as you had mentioned, with your business and with your league, which there's famous adages from Michael Jordan that said, Republicans buy shoes too, and most of the time, leagues and teams and businesses were supposed to stay neutral. And if you look at the history of sport and the advocacy, which is usually on the front line of understanding systemic racism in this country, to LGBTQ rights, to women's equal pay, indigenous rights, you name it. Like, there are athletes that have used their platform and notoriety being that person in the arena that shares their viewpoint. Fewer leagues. In 2020, we saw leagues stand up. And I think that was really important because of the way that society has evolved, and frankly, our country has become more splintered, is that we leverage the opportunity to, when we aggregate, especially in sports, people from all different walks of life and views, to have a conversation and not to and not to just say, this is what should be and this is how I feel, but welcome the conversation. And in the end, going back to the entrepreneur's journey, we're lucky to get to choose the people that we want to work with and relationships we want to build. We're also in a position where we can share the way we feel and hopefully ignite healthy conversation and debate. And it was a lot easier for me to do that because our sport is an indigenous game, and some of my closest friends and some of the best players in the PLL are Black. And so let's invite that opportunity to discuss what their experiences are, and what my experience is, and what Lyle's experience is, and the collective, right? Because you have to have the collective. I don't think it was a coincidence that being so important to our mission when we went to go build the PLL in 2019, that we had that opportunity in 2020.
I think that's, so well said. And, I commend you for that, because it just goes to show your standards and what you want to do to grow the game, and you stood by your words. And I want to think about, what do you think someone now that's, 7, 8 years old looks at lacrosse, the game of lacrosse, compared to when you were 7, 8, or 8 years old looking at the game of lacrosse? How much different is it now? And just knowing that there is a future compared to when you were making $6,000, for playing the game, to now
Yeah.
where it is today. How do you think that the game has grown in that capacity?
Man, it's so different, and it's a good question that I should probably journal on more and more, because it helps with reflection and I think satisfaction, and that's always important as part of like our gratitude in life. Lacrosse is in a much different place than it was when I was 7 and 8 years old. It was hardly televised then. Now people are in our industry are talking about whether there's too many games on TV, and if that hurts people's attendance, And so I mean, there's that. There's social media. There's the stars of the game. There's the diversity in the game now versus then, and where we want to go 10 and 15 years from now. And so I think young boys and girls are far more likely to play this game, feel more invited, feel more included than they were 20 years ago.
That's fantastic, and it's always about the growth of the game. And I'm glad that you're able to do that, and leading that way and engineering it. I want to say thank you for coming out, but our Plymouth Rock Insurance New Jersey Teachers Plan of New Jersey, the teacher plan of New Jersey, they are big sponsors of this show. I know your mom was an art teacher, so I would love for you to tell me something about an educator that has impacted your life. I know you may be biased, but if you can just dive into maybe a story that someone that really helped you along your way in helping you, in your education. Obviously, you said you were big on audio and learning that way, but is there someone that really
Yeah.
helped out you throughout your journey?
Yeah, I mean, you got to give a shout out to my mom, especially because of the creative influence that comes in through the discipline of art. And a lot of what I bring to my career, not just on the field, but what I do in the PLL, is think creatively, think abstractly, draw outside the lines. Those are types of things that you learn in art. And, I still to this day will get out an easel and a canvas and take some acrylic and try to express different views. And I think that I'll only be doing more of it as I get older. So some of the stuff that that we worked on together, and we still try to do paint days together, but when I was younger, may conflict with the rest of the school system that wants to be more regimented and logical and math-based and science-based and history-based. The ability to get art and the creative arts as part of your day-to-day has led me to so much that I've done now in my current career.
Well, thank you, Plymouth Rock, the Teachers Insurance Plan in New Jersey, for this podcast. And also, Paul, thank you for being able to be a guest on here. As I was a guest on yours, I appreciate you coming on ours and sharing just so much knowledge and perspective, and just the psychological aspect of an athlete, and now going into your business life and being able to share those stories. It's honestly a pleasure to talk to you, my brother, and thank you again. I'll make sure I'll be getting you that whiskey and that coffee over there.
I appreciate that, man. It's always such a pleasure to see you and have a conversation with you. And we'll get you to a game this summer when we're in New York.
Absolutely. You already know, my man. Thank you for listening to a Cup of bELieve podcast. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and all audio platforms.